this looks like Nazism. And so does this. And so does this. To be absolutely clear, radical Islam is not Nazism. Many of Nazism's racist and atheist underpinnings and goals are abhorrent to it. But then how can we understand what we're seeing here? In this episode of the Dawa series, we'll try to understand what this has to do with this, and what this means for the rest of us. But first, let's remind ourselves what radical Dawa is. As we explained in episode 1, radical Dawa includes both the ideology itself and the way this ideology is spread. But how could German Nazis impact radical Dawa today? In order to unravel the mystery, we need to go back to the mid-1930s, when National Socialism was on the rise. At the time, the Middle East was ruled by European colonial powers, Britain and France. The Germans were also trying to get a foothold in the region. If you'd said the Muslims living here would certainly throw them out because of their racism and atheism, you'd be completely reasonable. But the opposite started happening. While certainly many did not view the Nazis favorably, many Islamists and Arab nationalists admired and even began aligning themselves with them. We admired the Nazis. We were immersed in reading Nazi literature and books that were the source of the Nazi spirit. But admiration is only one piece of the puzzle. In 1930s Iraq, Nazi influence was felt in the highest ranks of power. Prime Minister Rashid Ali al-Gaylani openly supported Hitler. After he was overthrown by the British in 1941, Nazi-inspired riots broke out across Iraq, killing hundreds of Jews. In Egypt, Hassan al-Banna, one of the most influential Islamists and founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, admired Hitler and collaborated with the Nazis. Clerics in Iran declared Hitler as a messianic figure and protector of Islam. And in 1935, President Reza Shah changed the name of his country from Persia to Land of the Aryans, or Iran, in the belief that Iranians and Germans shared blood. In British Mandate Palestine, Arabs established a local Nazi league, and Nazi influence was increasingly felt among the Arab population. A German official wrote in 1937, "The Palestinian Arabs show on all levels a great sympathy for the new Germany and its Führer," which still happens today. But it gets much worse. Some Muslim leaders were Nazi collaborators. The most extreme example was Jerusalem's Grand Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini. Haj Amin was one of the most powerful, prominent men in British Mandate Palestine. In 1937, he had to flee the region after being implicated in instigating deadly riots against the Jews and the British. And where did he ultimately end up?
Haj Amin, the Mufti of Jerusalem, was living in Berlin for 4 critical years, 1941 to 1945, the years during which the Holocaust took place. That he was an honored guest of the German government.
Der Führer empfing den Großmufti von Jerusalem. Der Großmufti ist das religiöse Oberhaupt der Araber in Palästina.
Haj Amin developed very close ties, therefore, with the whole of the Nazi leadership. He was an intimate of Heinrich Himmler, who was in charge administratively of the final solution. He was close to Eichmann.
While in Berlin, Haj Amin helped promote the Nazis' goals within the Muslim community in Europe and in the Middle East. He established a Muslim Nazi army unit in Bosnia and helped establish the Nazi Arab Legion in North Africa. He even authored pamphlets to teach Muslim soldiers about the similarities between Islam and National Socialism. He also arranged for radio broadcasts of German propaganda in Arabic, which called for the murder of Jews in the Middle East and for the support of Germany. And perhaps the most sinister offense, Haj Amin petitioned European governments to bar Jews from leaving Europe, dooming thousands of Jews, many of them children, to what he knew would be certain death in the concentration camps. Amazingly, some in the Arab Muslim world today still support Hitler's final solution.
Aan de ene kant wat Hitler met de Joden heeft gedaan, zeg maar, ben ik wel mee tevreden. Wat mij betreft kon Hitler best wel alle Joden meteen afslachten.
So we've seen that Nazis and many in the Arab world had a close relationship. But why? It was a combination of shared enemies, shared values, as odd as that may sound, and admiration for Hitler's tactics. So who were their shared enemies? These enemies were Western powers like Britain, France, later the United States, and of course, the Jews. The Germans felt humiliated and oppressed by the punishments they received after their defeat in World War I. The Islamists and Arab nationalists also felt oppressed by these Western powers and by Jews through the growing Zionist movement, who they saw as colonial invaders who they wanted out of their lands. And many of the Islamists and Arab nationalists wanted to partner with Germany, believing that they could defeat these shared enemies together. There were also some shared values. Haj Amin told Muslim soldiers on many occasions that National Socialism and Islam were natural allies because of shared values. For example, across the Middle East, democracies were viewed as weak, while dictatorships, like Hitler's regime, were viewed as strong and the best way to unite the masses. Finally, there were Hitler's tactics. Radical Dawah owes a great debt to what the Islamists learned from Hitler's tactics, most notably, perhaps, through youth indoctrination.
The radical Muslims, without any doubt, learned from the Nazis and how to indoctrinate the young. Almost from the beginning, the Nazis absolutely concentrated on captivating the young. So I certainly did not grow up hating Jews, far from it. But the indoctrination of the Hitler youth pretty soon made me realize that the Jews were a mortal danger. It basically came down to this. If you get your children young enough, there is nothing you cannot do with them.
And today, this indoctrination is happening in large numbers throughout the Arab Muslim world, in schools, summer camps, and places of worship.
Jihad. Jihad ستوي.
تكبير! أقوى تكبير! حلوين ما شاء الله.
The Germans lost the war, and this should have been the end of their influence on the Arab world, but it wasn't. Why not? Following the war, the Arab world continued the fight against the West and the Jews, relying heavily on Nazi expertise. After Germany's defeat, over 4,000 former Nazis fled to the Middle East. They found safe haven under the wings of Arab governments, with whom they had camaraderie. According to a CIA report, by the 1960s, over 3,000 Nazis were employed by the Egyptian government. And by 1967, it was believed that 6,000 to 7,000 former Nazi officials lived in the Middle East. Many converted to Islam and took on Muslim names so as to escape the authorities. Egyptian President Nasser hired German Nazi scientists to develop his missile program and hired other high-ranking Nazi officials to train soldiers in guerrilla warfare and propaganda. In Syria, Nazis were hired to teach special torture tactics for prisoners. This influence continues today. Unfortunately, Hitler's brand of anti-Semitism and tactics are highly emulated in the Arab world. Hitler is praised by many clerics who hope that the final solution will be carried out today.
سلط عليهم طوال التاريخ من يؤدبهم نتيجة إفسادهم. آخر تأديب كان تأديب هتلر، والمرة القادمة إن شاء الله ستكون على أيدي المؤمنين.
هتلر يقول: ما من فعل يغاير الأخلاق وما من جريمة بحق المجتمع إلا ولليهود يد فيها. لكن من كرامة الله لهذه الأمة أخبرنا بأنه سيجمع اليهود في مكان واحد لتكون الضربة قاسمة.
Islamists continue to gain power by rallying Muslims around the threat of shared enemies, real or imagined.
هيا لنجاهد أمريكا في كل مكان كما تعتدي علينا في كل مكان أن السبيل الفعال في مواجهة عدوانها هو سبيل الدعوة والجهاد.
The use of dawah today has been profoundly shaped by this admiration for the Nazis, and Islamists continue to mold young minds into soldiers for the cause. So what does this have to do with this? Unfortunately, a whole lot. Today, we're seeing the consequences of a fire that was lit over 80 years ago.
Who are the successors, the most dangerous? As I would say that it's the Islamo-fascists. I see Islamism, or radical political Islam today, as the movement, the ideology, the organizations which most resemble the Nazi past. There are some significant differences, but there are also parallels, and it's the parallels that we need to focus on if we want to understand the nature of the threat that they pose to the West, to human freedom in general, to civilization.